Hey everybody, welcome to Life is Beautiful. I'm Anthony. Today, I am going to have the absolute pleasure of talking to James Knott from the Better Beer Authority YouTube channel. The Better Beer Authority was one of the greatest, most inspirational early YouTube channels that were inspiring people and teaching people and informing people who were just getting into the craft beer scene at the peak of the bubble. People were really searching, grasping at straws, trying to find information, and James was there to really teach us what beer was all about. So it's an absolute pleasure to be able to sit down with him and just kind of pick his brain about the history of beer YouTube, talking about the importance of beer reviews on the greater beer scene and what is in store for the future for both James and the Better Beer Authority. So let's get into it. You ran one of the most prolific beer review, beer-centric YouTube channels of all time. You were one of the earliest beer YouTubers on the entire platform. What was it that kind of inspired you to get into the world of beer reviews and beer discussion on YouTube?
Yeah, I mean, my entry into the whole beer review thing was a little bit different than probably most of the beer reviewers. I actually didn't know anything about beer at all, which was what kind of made it sort of exciting. I was more interested in starting a YouTube show, and I was looking for a subject. And I wanted, I had just left the news business, and I wanted to do something that wasn't controversial. And I thought, avoid politics. What else could I do? And I was thinking beer. Beer would be like a good thing that I could focus on. And what I didn't realize is how many people took it so seriously.
Yeah, I definitely think that catches a lot of people who are new to the beer YouTube community, how intense people can be in regards to their passion for beer.
Yeah, but from the very beginning, once I decided that's what I wanted to do, I started doing research about what else was on YouTube. And at that point, there were only just, 3 or 4 or 5 people that were doing beer reviews, but none of them were they were doing it because they liked beer, but none of them were doing it in a way where they were having high production values in terms of video production and audio and stuff like that. And I just thought for a very small budget, I could build a studio in my basement and I could run it like I had run the show that I worked for, because I used to work at CNN for Larry King Live. Mm-hmm. And so I decided I could make Larry King Live except about beer. Because the beautiful thing about it is that once you built that TV studio, all of a sudden you had this world set up, and it didn't cost anything. It didn't the setup cost some money, but every additional episode didn't cost money, because all of a sudden you could just sit down, you get a beer, you can buy a 6-pack for $10. So the entire budget of an episode was $10.
Yeah. Very minimal upkeep.
Yeah. And I was like, even if I buy the 6-pack and I invite some friends over, then it's still who doesn't want to come over and drink beer, right? So once every other week, we would shoot 2 episodes. So then I would have 1 episode per week. And so basically as a bunch of my friends, and we would get together, drink 2 beers and maybe a few more afterwards. But we would drink the beers and shoot the episodes. And it was very regimented though. I insisted that these guys take it seriously, that these beers, even though we weren't experts on beer, that the people who made them, genuinely wanted to make a good product. And we always started with that assumption that these people had a good intention, and that we needed to treat it with respect. We didn't go just trashing beer and trashing breweries. We actually, it was about whether we liked the flavor or whether we didn't, whether that recipe appealed to our taste buds or whether it didn't. But it wasn't about they're just using these cheap ingredients and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know. It's we didn't want to be snobs about it. We wanted to generally just point people towards beers that we were really enjoying.
Yeah, and so the Better Beer Authority show was, I don't know, it just stood so far out from all the other early YouTube channels because most people were sitting there, they were talking like on a laptop webcam or something like that. Terrible audio, terrible focus, terrible video quality. I mean, y'all were bringing like some full on professional quality to it that honestly, still to this day, most beer centric channels don't even come close to. So I mean, y'all definitely like during y'all's foundational laying, knocked it out of the park. It's definitely set a standard that no one lives up to.
Well, I mean, and it's hard. It was like I worked in television for 8 years to be able to understand how to do that. And you could definitely get to that point. But what it allowed me to do is focus less on like, oh, is my audio quality good enough for my video? Is that good enough? Like, what's holding back my channel? It allowed me to focus more on learning about beer. Like, I really dug into like books on beer, and for every episode I wanted to have like an educational component to it, so people who were new to beer like I was could start learning about it. Like, what is an IBU? Like, how does that affect your perception of beer? What is a session beer? You know, like these are all things that I was like, oh wow, these are all new crazy concepts. I didn't know people were doing this. I didn't even know what the difference between an ale and a lager was.
Yeah.
I mean, when we started, I was in the basement with my friend Scott and my brother-in-law Joby, and we were all drinking Miller Lights, and we were going, let's see, we could do Bud Light, we could do Miller Light, we could do Budweiser,
The classics.
Coors Light. Like, there's so many beers. And then I went to like the beer store and looked at the shelves, and I was like, holy moly, there's a lot of beer. You know, like I hadn't even like appreciated how many different kinds there were. I mean, so just the very first trip, and like, how do you choose what the first beer is and stuff like that, you know?
Well, that is actually an interesting topic. That's one of the questions I wanted to ask you. The first video that y'all did on Better Beer Theory was Schlafly Pale Ale.
Yes.
That was an interesting beer. I've had that a few times throughout my life. And some of the other interviews I've done with beer reviewers of some people will talk about like, oh, this beer was revolutionary. That's why it was like my baby. That's why I needed it to be first. I was curious, what drew your attention to the Schlafly Pale Ale that made that want to be your first one?
Well, my brother was at school at Washington University in St. Louis, and I went to visit him while I was building the set. And I said, hey, Greg, can I go like to the store, carry out, and buy some local beer? I might use it for my show. And I didn't have a ton of craft beer experience, but one experience I had before the show was just going and having Schlafly beer in St. Louis, and it just seemed like a good one to start with. You know, it wasn't hugely. It just felt right at the moment. But you know, at that point, it was hilarious because, you know, we did our first episode, I think, and all the guys were like, oh, this is so bitter. And it's just a pale ale. It's not crazy. It's not overly hoppy. I haven't had it in a long time, but, you know, it's just a solid pale ale. And
yeah, exactly.
But at the time, it's like, whoa, what's all this bitterness?
You've mentioned a few times that when you first started Better Beer Authority, you didn't have a whole lot of prior knowledge into the world of craft beer. I'm curious, how did you come up with that name?
I don't know. I guess just brainstorming, like it just sort of had some good alliteration to it. And then, you know, and it was kind of laughable because was I really the Better Beer Authority? I don't know.
Well, see, so honestly, I'm honestly surprised throughout this conversation of finding that out, because I remember when I first started trying to get into the world of like beer and beer YouTube, I started looking at some of the channels that are around then. Of course, yours were one of them. And honestly, I knew nothing, and I was watching your channel. I was like, I'm learning so much. You know? So legit, to a lot of people, you were the better beer authority.
By the end, we got pretty good. I felt like, because we all legitimately wanted to learn more. We were legitimately excited to try new beers, and I also started learning a lot about what beer drinkers wanted and how like the kinds of beers that were exciting to them. So it became like beer selection for the shows. So we were only doing one show a week. So all of a sudden, like, beer selection became this big thing too, where it's like, how do you pick a beer that has broad appeal in a market that's getting like more and more segmented, So all of a sudden these beers had to have like a larger purpose. And so it's like, we used to have breweries that would send us beer for free. And, that was kind of cool. At first we were like, oh, awesome, free beer. This is awesome. But what I started noticing was, like, when we would do the free beer episodes, our viewership would go down. And it was because these were beers that needed attention. The brewers were giving the beer away because they needed more people to buy the beer. It's like, so it was more worthwhile for me to like go out and like think about like KBS from Founders was like a great one at the time, because it was like, that would come out and beer nerds all over would get super excited. And then it's like, they're so excited, they're waiting in line and paying extra and all this stuff. And so then all of a sudden it's this great beer nerd episode. But on the other hand, we did one that was a blind taste test with Miller Lite, Coors Light, and Bud Light. And that's the most watched episode of all time. It's like, it's like, there had to be a story or a reason to do it. It couldn't just be like, oh, this is my brother's brewery and blah, blah, blah. It's like, nobody cares about that stuff. And I think that's what a lot of beer reviewers miss sometimes, is that, yeah, if you go to like your local brewery, you can get some cool bottle aged thing that nobody else can get. But they probably don't care to watch either, because they can't taste it and experience that with you.
Was hype a driving factor for your video planning?
I mean, in a certain sense, the thing is the more you learn about the community, the more you get excited about things too. And so when you mentioned Pliny the Elder and Hetty Topper, both of which were Better Beer Authority episodes, like, when we finally got our hands on a bottle of Pliny the Elder, I cannot tell you how excited we were. And when I actually tasted it for the first time, it was like a mind-blowing beer experience for me, because I had never tasted a beer like that. And so there was hype that led me to that beer. But then I also learned a lot about beer in the process of trying it, and I was excited to share it. And it's like, if I'm excited to share it with the world, then that, I don't know, it's like a two-way street. I'm excited to share it with the world. They're excited to hear about it. That's kind of the thing that you're looking for. I mean, in this day and age, like a Corona episode would do really well right now, because, it's like on people's minds. And there's a whole discussion to be made, like, oh, is this hurting Corona as a company? And I just read a thing that said, like, all their brands are up, like, 5 to 30%.
Yeah, if you look at their parent company, Constellation Brands, if you just look at them on the stock market right now, this is not affecting them in the slightest, in a negative sense. If anything, people are literally going, oh, I kind of want a Corona now.
Yeah. And so like that would be like a good episode, because it has a story to it, and that's where I started to move the show as I progressed, was just, I wanted to make sure there was a reason why we were doing it, that it wasn't just some random orange wheat from the middle of the country that nobody cares about. It's just...
Yeah, I definitely think that when you're doing an episode that is very one beer specific, it definitely helps to have that kind of narrative aspect to it. It's something that draws people in. And even if it's like a beer that kind of most people have had, like a lot of Polliner beers people have had, but I mean, they've been around for hundreds of years. There's so much history and all that stuff behind it that I think you can use that as a tool to bring it in. And I agree. I think a lot of beer reviewers kind of miss that aspect of the beer drinking experience.
Yeah, I mean, like the Rocky Mountain Oyster Stout.
Ooh, yep.
Where they, I think it's Wynkoop Brewing
Yep.
Company.
I've had it. It's delicious.
It is a delicious beer. I was so surprised at how delicious it was. But they add 2 bull testicles to it.
Yep.
And so that was a brilliant marketing thing on their part. But it was also like a fun story. It made for a fun episode. We did it as a blind taste test.
Mm-hmm.
And then we revealed, hey, what do you think that this was made with bull testicles? You know, and it's like that, you know, it's just like we planned this whole thing, or I planned it. The guys in the panel didn't know what was happening.
That's the best way to feed people bull testicles.
Yeah. But, you know, like another thing that's kind of interesting is halfway through we switched from knowing what beer it was to blind taste tests. So I usually knew what the beer was because I was the host and producing the show.
Makes sense.
But the panelists would come in and they wouldn't know. Mm-hmm. And it all started with Sam Adams' Boston Lager episode because we did that episode and the guys were just so dismissive of the beer, but because it's like, oh, this is mainstream. I don't know. It's just beer. They weren't taking the time to appreciate it as a Vienna lager. Mm-hmm. And I got frustrated and I was like, that's it. They're not seeing the labels anymore. And we are going to judge the beer on the beer and then we can talk about the marketing later.
Yeah. And I mean, that honestly makes so much sense. I've watched people in real life sitting at a bar and they order something that's like rare or exclusive or hype driven. And instantly they're like, oh, it's the greatest beer ever. When really it's like okay at best. It's being driven by exclusivity, by the fear of missing out, FOMO, and all that stuff. Like hype is a massively deciding factor in craft beer, and I do think a lot of your beers, like some of the classics, like Boston Lager you mentioned, they get overlooked because it doesn't have that Instagrammable impact. You know what I mean?
Oh, the Boston Lager is like such a great beer garden beer. I mean, it's just like a classic style that's well done, well balanced. I mean, there's no reason to dismiss it because it's not 15% and aged in bourbon barrels. Mm-hmm. You know, like on the other side, I mean, like one of the biggest disappointments was for me, just as a beer from the hype point of view, was Dark Lord by Three Floyds.
Yep.
I would love to say, like, I do like Three Floyds beers and I think they're a great brewery, but it's like Dark Lord Day and all that stuff. It's like builds up all this hype and you're like, oh my gosh, I got a bottle of Dark Lord and I just traded my firstborn child for it. And then you get it and it has like so much residual sweetness and it's just like kind of sticky and gross and you're just like, this is what I paid $30 for or $50 or however much you're spending, and you're like, you know, like at that moment, hype had overtaken all reality of what this beer is. It's just like a 15% sticky piece of mess. And, you know, sorry to Three Floyds, because I do like a lot of their beers. But it's just like hype just like drives so much of this where you're just like for me, like a perfect beer is just a well-balanced IPA. Like I've tasted most of the best beers in the world and concluded that I don't need to have like a rare 14% stout that's in a bomber bottle that like if I drank the whole thing by myself I would get so messed up I can't see my toes, you know, like I just want to have like a nice lager and hang out with my friends, and that's, to me, that's what beer is about, is social lubricant and hanging out with your buddies. And
for sure like I do think people have kind of lost the aspect of what a good beer is, you know, and that's kind of depressing for me in a lot of ways. I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody because I was that person. I was the person who was hunting down your Pliny the Youngers and Elders. I was the one trading away every beer I could get my hands on for a bottle of Dark Lord, all that stuff, you know. But
hey, let me cut in for a second. I would still trade like a good amount for applying to the younger. I haven't had that one yet. It's on my wish list.
Well,
But
well, let me
go back to your point.
let me let me tell a little quick aside story. I was drinking. I went to a Pliny the Younger release event in Denver, Colorado, a few years back, and I was with some other people from the Denver brewing scene, and we were all having good discussion and everything. We ordered a Comrade Brewing's double IPA just right before they brought the Pliny the Younger. Every single person at that table, hands down, was like, oh, this brewery who just started a couple months back is way better than Pliny the Younger. I mean, it was, we wasted hours waiting in line, sitting at the bar. And I don't know. But getting away from the hype discussion, I do have a couple of questions about you in regards to just beer reviews as a whole. Okay. Do you think there is a significant place in the beer world for beer reviews? Like, do beer reviews hold the same weight as importance as like a beer distributor or something like that?
Well, I certainly do. I mean, I came out of Better Beer Authority. At one point, I had a debate internally, like, do I want to like take this full time and try and turn it into a job, because I was starting to get advertising revenue and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I made the decision that I just needed to move on to a different project at that point. But I do think there is room for it. Basically, all the stuff that I learned at Better Beer Authority, I now apply to like my current role, which we haven't talked about it, but I'm a partner at a business called Knott Brewing Company in Powell, Ohio.
That was going to come up.
Yeah, and I don't need to go too far into that right now. Just the fact that like I do the social media for the brewery. When we see reviews, we take those very seriously, because we want to make a beer that's good for the consumers that come visit us in Powell, but also a beer that, as it goes out into the world, people are happy with, you know? Mm-hmm. And so if we can a product and it goes out to the stores and ends up on someone's patio, we want to know that that's a good product. So, for instance, if there were beer reviewers on YouTube who wanted to review Knott beers, we would probably send them the beer, or because we want to get feedback and constructive feedback on that beer, just to know, like, hey, we dry hopped it? Are they getting the aromas that we're intending? Yeah. You know, hey, we spend an extra week lagering it. Are they appreciating the fact that our lagers are like clear, kind of thing? And for us, like, quality is important. Getting outside constructive criticism, we value that kind of thing. And so I think like having a review community is really important. I mean, we watch Untapped, we watch Yelp, we watch Google reviews. And then if we notice like a trend of something, we can pivot and make adjustments to our production process or a recipe based on feedback we're getting.
So are y'all actively considering beer reviews on YouTube specifically as part of your marketing plan?
To a certain degree, we've had we have not like really reached out to YouTube beer reviewers specifically. But for example, like before we opened, we invited like 20 Instagram people to like come in and try the beer and take pictures and stuff like that. Because we know like getting out there in that community helps us spread the word.
For sure.
We think if we make good quality beer and put it in our can and get it out to the community, that's step number one. Getting people to talk about it and tell their friends about it is step number two. Mm-hmm. And that's basically my job at the brewery.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. We might have to have another interview in the future about that aspect altogether. But so you've kind of have an interesting perspective. One, you've been I'm going to use professional beer reviewer just as a term, and now that you're in the actual world of brewing, you do have a slightly wider perspective than I think most beer reviewers do. Do you think that there is a need for certification or training or some type of authenticity to the beer reviewer to put out an opinion on a beer?
I don't think so. So when we did Better Beer Authority, we came up with our own rating system. And we wrote it down before we shot our first episode, and that was the guiding principle to how we rated beers. And we were very specifically not BJCP certified, and ours was not a style critique. It was just a personal opinion thing. What I think is more important when you're reviewing a beer is not how much certifications you have, it's that you explain thoroughly to the people how you are judging it. Yeah. That way they know, like, oh, well, he's just saying like this beer appeals to him, or hey, he's BJCP certified, so he's trying to judge it on style. And those are two totally different things,
for sure.
But it's just making clear that the people understand where you're coming from. Now, you might think putting more certifications makes you more appealing as a beer reviewer, but you also have to think, like, we had my brother-in-law Joby is he has 0 certifications. We considered him to be, we called him Joby Six-Pack because he was like the everyman sort of thing. And he had fans on our show that just were like, dude, Joby's telling it like it is, bro. Yeah. You know? And I think it's like, hey, you can also have a show where you're like, hey, there's a whole community of people who just like 40-ounce beers, like Save the Polar Bear 79. Those where they just chug 40s. You know, they have their own perspective, you know, and it's like, as a viewer, you have to look at the reviewer and say, like, what are they bringing to the conversation? As a reviewer, you have to say, how am I advancing the conversation? And if you can legitimately say that you are being an honest broker, advancing the conversation, then that's what's most important. On the other hand, if you're just like, I'm only going to review beers that I get for free from breweries, all of a sudden you're not an honest broker anymore. You are, you're basically like a mouthpiece for the breweries, you know?
Yep.
So like, if in my perfect scenario, the beer reviewer buys their own beer based on what they want to review, and then they can get some advertising revenue that covers the costs of that beer. And in that sense, like, they are looking for beers that have a broad appeal, but they're also can be like honest about it and not feeling like, oh, I'm going to hurt the brewer's feelings. You know, it's like, if we sent you a beer and you like dissed it, I know like our brewers would be like, you know, they'd be upset. It's like the beer reviewer's job is not to be like friends with the brewers. Beer reviewer's job is to be an honest broker so that the people watching feel like they're gaining knowledge.
Yeah, I definitely feel just some, I'm not going to throw shade on anybody, but some behind the scenes knowledge that I have talking with other beer reviewers. I've seen a distinct lack of integrity when it comes to beer reviews. You know, they get a certain status, they start getting beers sent to them. They won't talk bad about that beer because they want that status level to continue. They want to be friends with the brewer, like you were saying. I do think that is a major issue within the beer review community. And I think YouTube kind of complicates that, especially because it's your face, it's your name out there. It's, you know, a little different when you're on like an Untapped or something where you can be a little bit more anonymous. But Yeah, that is an interesting concept.
Well, I came at it from CNN, where we had very like strict rules about how we had to what is it? Not like announce. That's not the exact reveal. Reveal like any like connections we had to a product or something, so that they know that there is some bias implicit if
Mhm.
there was bias. And so like I came out of like I cannot say the Better Beer Authority was perfect in doing that, but we tried to be honest. Like, for example, Newcastle sent us a bunch of products and stuff like that. And at the beginning of the episode, I very specifically say these beers were sent to us by Newcastle.
Mhm.
So that may affect how this episode goes. And,
Yeah.
like, not saying, like, hey, we're only going to say positive things. And I told Newcastle, like, I'm not promising you that we're going to say good stuff. And then the funny thing out of that episode, which I love, is that they basically sent us they sent us these T-shirts, except we're just a group of dudes. They sent us like female T-shirts that were too small for us. And so basically, for the episode, we all put on Newcastle T-shirts that were way too tight, and like that guy in a little shirt. Uh, and so we did the whole episode wearing overly tight Newcastle T-shirts,
Mhm.
just because, like, just I don't know. I'm sure the guy who sent it to us was kind of annoyed, but uh,
Hey, I mean that's their fault.
right. No, that's the thing. And on the brewery's end, if you are going to send beer to a beer reviewer, don't send them the underfills or the outdated stuff. Send them the super fresh stuff that is going to blow their minds, because like a good honest broker is going to call it out. If a brewery sends you beer for free and it tastes like the hops are oxidized, a good reviewer should call that out. So don't
Mhm.
be the brewery that sends them your old stuff, like send them the stuff that just came off the line that day.
Yeah, for sure. I especially if you're sending out your product and you're trying to use other people as an ambassador for your product, you should probably send them the top of the line stuff. You don't want the mouthpiece talking down to your product.
Well, and then the thing is too is like if you think about it just from a PR standpoint, if I were to send you a beer as like a beer reviewer, you're actually investing your time in doing that.
Yeah,
So
sure.
if I sent you like this 6-pack and it like cost us like such and such amount to make, maybe like I'm just throwing out a number like $6, like it only costs us $6. You're probably spending like 2 or 3 hours working on the review by the time you like set up the shot and taste the beer and post it and promote it. And it's like, if you think about it from the labor standpoint, it's like pay them for their labor, like send them a whole case. I don't know.
Yeah. One of the questions that I know you have addressed actually on your channel near the end of it, but I've actually reached out to some of my private chats with a bunch of beer tubers and everything to see if they had any questions that they wanted to ask. Overwhelmingly, people wanted to know why you stopped because they said, BBA was such a inspiration for them. It was they wanted to know why you decided to stop the Better Beer Authority show.
Yeah, well, some of this is going to sound a little ironic considering where I've ended up. But I felt like for Better Beer Authority, I had like a moment where I had to decide of whether I wanted to take it to the next level or whether it was just always going to be this hobby that was in the background for me. Because like the hobby part of it was I was a stay-at-home dad and I was just doing this while my kids were napping. So they would go for a nap and I'd be like, all right, I'm going to go edit some video. Then I would go back to being a stay-at-home dad. And it was like Mondays I was busy stay-at-home dad because I was like getting ready to post Better Beer Authority. And that was like a big moment for me every week. And then it started really building an audience and started getting some advertising revenue. And between Better Beer Authority and my my time-lapse videos and a few other things, the revenue actually started adding up. And I was like, wow, I think I might be able to make this into a job. But then when I was like doing the calculations about how to turn it into a job, I felt like, man, I'm going to have to drink a lot of beers to make this work.
Yeah.
And I was like, am I ready to commit to drinking that many beers? Even at like, if you're going to do like 5 episodes a week, well, that's 5 beers a week, which is not that much for most beer tubers. But it's not the 5 beers that are in the review. It's when you have all the reviewers come to your house and then they get like 3 beers in and then they're like, I'm going to hang out for a little bit and blah, blah, blah. And next thing you know, you're like discussing the meaning of life and how we can take this thing to the moon, and you're just like, I just started worrying that if it was my full-time job, that how would I turn it off and how would I live a healthy life kind of thing. To be honest, I love beer. I'm super passionate about it still, but I wanted to have like some balance in my life where I could escape it. And that was the main driving factor. And so what I did next was I started a mountain bike website called quickdirt.com.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that was like successful in its own ways. And between Better Beer Authority and quickdirt.com, I learned a lot about social media and marketing and those communities. And I currently apply that to my job now. Like you said, I'm not producing things. Well, I produce way more content now. It just all is in the name of Nocterra Brewing Company in Palo, Ohio.
Absolutely. Health is an interesting thing. In recent years, I've seen a lot of beer YouTubers talk about like the effects of being a beer reviewer. You can watch time-lapse videos, even on my own channel, from start to like years down the road. A lot of us had put on significant weight. I remember watching a video of yours several years back where you did a time lapse of like weight loss and everything like that. Did running a beer show take like a physical toll on you?
Yeah, I think that to a certain degree. I don't think it was just the beer reviews. I think I just also had like an unhealthy lifestyle. I mean, I was the kind of guy who's like, 10 wings, that's not enough. I need like 20 wings.
Yeah.
And I could get away with it because I'm a pretty active guy, but you can only get away with so much for so long. And it definitely started adding up. That was part of my decision to start the mountain biking thing. Was I was like, all right, this is a pretty healthy activity. And so if I'm blogging about this, then I'm going out and exercising while I blog, as opposed to the way I always put it is like, imagine if you were someone who reviewed cake. You're like, oh, I've only had 3 pieces of cake today.
Yeah.
It's like, I think it's all good in moderation. Even at the brewery, I have to exercise moderation. I get offered beer all the time and have to say no thank you. But not everyone can balance that. I've seen some beer reviewers that balance it very well. And then there's other ones that you can tell like, wow, like they just shot this review and then they went to a brewery and had 6 more beers. It's like,
yeah. I definitely think there needs to be a discussion in the beer community sometime in the future about the health effects of a craft beer hobby, a craft beer passion, craft beer obsession, both in terms of like weight, nutrition, things like that. Also using it as like a coping mechanism. There's sometimes a hobby bleeds into an emotional crutch, or I've seen where it can even breach into like alcoholism. So I definitely think there needs to be a discussion in the community at some point about that. But
so I developed a philosophy, and my philosophy was that beer could not be the hobby. It was the thing to do to celebrate after I enjoyed my hobby. So I would go and do the like epic mountain bike races, and earn a beer. And it was like at the end, I might have 2 or 3 beers, and that might be like 800 calories. Not who's counting, but but at the end, it's like I probably burnt 2,000 calories getting there. It's like
Yeah, for sure.
I that was my philosophy, was that beer is what you do when you're celebrating your hobby, not your hobby itself.
Absolutely. All right, so I just got one question. I feel like I already know the answer, but a lot of people wanted to know, would you ever consider bringing back Better Beer Authority?
Well, it probably can't happen, right? I'm so busy right now working. Like the brewery, I do the social media and marketing for the brewery, and it is definitely a passion of mine. And every day I get to work with beer and tell people about how awesome our beer is. And I truly believe that we have, after tasting all the beers that I tasted, when I met the brewers for Knott Brewing Company, I thought, wow, this is as good as anything I tasted on the show. This deserves to be on store shelves. And I wanted to be a part of it. And so, I don't brew the beer. I don't pretend to know how to brew beer. When they've offered to let me tag in on brew days, I'm like, no, thank you. My only job is to take this awesome beer that they're brewing and tell people about it. And whenever I drink a beer of ours, and we critically drink every beer that we have and try and decide, is it up to our standards and are we proud to sell it? I feel like that Better Beer Authority experience basically gave me the knowledge that I needed to make good decisions about what the beer community wants, what tastes good, what is good quality beer. So I feel qualified to be here because of Better Beer Authority.
Absolutely. That's really cool.
But I can't go back to that moment right now. I'm just too heavily invested in what I'm doing. I like making videos and making content, but right now it's I have to work on this and keep this as my focus. I use so much creative energy right here that when I go home at the end of the day, I don't want to be creative. I just want to go and veg out,
I totally get that. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an absolute honor of mine. They always say don't meet your heroes. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. You're a huge inspiration on me, and I know countless other people in the beer YouTube community today. So I just want to say thank you very much, James. And if there anything you want to talk about, anything you want to shout out going on in your life, I know that the Noctera is a huge part.
For your audience, the Knott Brewing Company is just such a passion of mine. We have a canning line, so our beer is getting more widely dispersed. But honestly, people are so excited about the beer that we're making beer as fast as we can, and it's only getting 10 miles away from the brewery. But Powell, Ohio is just a nice little community just north of Columbus, Ohio.
Okay, I got family there. I'll see if they can send me some stuff.
Oh yeah, they definitely should. We have lots of 6-packs. So, but it's this has been one, it's just been fun talking about Better Beer Authority, because there are definitely days when I miss it, and I loved that interaction with the community. It was a stage in my life that I'm super proud of. Yeah. I can't lie. I am proud of what we came up with. But I'm also proud of what I'm doing now. So,
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I would love to reach out and talk to you again someday about your current ventures, because I feel like that's pretty interesting to see somebody who laid the foundation and were able to turn it into a professional job outside of the small scope of YouTube. So I just want to say thank you very much. It was a lot of fun, and I can't wait till we talk again in the future, hopefully.
Awesome. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Have a good day, my friend.